Yes, of course, I am going to talk about Muslims, but I also want to talk more about Hindus and Muslims. I actually published a book, The Festival of Peers, Popular Islam, and Shared Devotion in South India. That book actually is all about Rayalaseema Muslims,
Okay.
but it's more about non-Muslim participation in Muslim devotional events.
During Muharram, Sita from the Hindu epic Ramayana and Fatima, the Prophet's daughter, both are invoked. How does that explain the syncretic relationship?
And then when I was documenting this story in Telangana, uh, most male performers discouraged me. Don't do this stuff. This is women's stuff. They don't know anything about Islamic history. Sorry to say this. In general, literary criticism and then literary theoretical matters are not that developed in Telugu.
Hello, this is Anjana Meenakshi for the News Minute. Today I'm sitting with Professor Afsar Mohammad from the University of Pennsylvania. He's a senior faculty there, and we are here to discuss his latest piece of writing, which was published in mid December 2023. It's titled The Rise of a Muslim Voice, Telugu Writing in Times of Hindu Nationalism. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Anjana, for this opportunity.
So let's just get right to it. And I think the first major distinction you made in your article was to divide Telugu Muslim writing into three categories. But what stood out to me was you made a clear demarcation between before the demolition of Babri Masjid and after the demolition of Babri Masjid.
Right.
So could you please tell us how writing was different before and after? What changed?
Thank you so much. That's a good beginning for this conversation. I actually thought that Babri Mosque demolition was not just in the case of history of Telugu literature, but in general, when you think about South Asian history and then religious histories, it's a landmark. The demolition actually made us rethink about the ideas of secularism, the idea of democracy, the distinctions between majoritarianism and minority politics. So that way, I wanted to emphasize that post-Babri demolition situation as related to not only literature, even in politics and other matters too, it's a key, or what we can say, paradigmatic shift.
Okay.
Of course, there was a lot of discussion about Muslim identity even before Babri demolition, but that discussion, that debate was not as explicit as after the demolition. So we got new vocabulary to talk about Muslim question.
Okay.
We got new theoretical tools, and then we have this immediate history to engage with. So those are the things that I wanted to stress. And then if I am going to write something like history of Muslim writing in Telugu, or for that matter even in South India, I would stick to that transformation.
So, could you give us some examples now that you've spoken about the paradigmatic shift of what exactly were the writers looking at? What were they specifically focusing on? If you could think of some names, or what were the key issues? Was it just the shock that a mosque had been demolished? Because I would like to also reference a poem by Khadar Moinuddin, where he speaks about, it's titled Birthmark, and he speaks about how a single drop of his blood is now coloring the lotus even more red,
Right.
which is a Hindutva symbol, and that's how it's being discussed. Would you like to comment a little more on that?
Yes. That is one of the excellent portraits of Muslim situation, not only in Telugu, public sphere, but also in general Indian context. The poem actually speaks about how we can understand the new politics of Hindutva, and then how we can also approach Muslim question using new vocabulary.
Right.
So this movement actually led to rethink in a very solid manner the distinction between majoritarianism and then minority politics. Of course, I would say Birthmark in many ways opened up that space, narrative space, I would say. But there were poets who were speaking about similar kind of tensions between majoritarian politics and minority politics. There were storytellers, there were intellectuals, but I want to also focus more on, in my future work, how the politics, how the debates at various levels, because it's not just about Muslim question for me, it's also a question about Hindu-Muslim exchange. As a scholar who focuses more on Hindu-Muslim interactions, for me, it's equally important to understand, yes, of course, I'm going to talk about Muslims, but I also want to talk more about Hindus and Muslims, which is actually one of the key component in the making of Indian history, religious history, and cultural history of India.
Yeah. Now, if we were to just focus on the Telugu states for a minute, right? Because if we look at the differences between Telugu Muslim writing in Rayalaseema or in Telangana, like you also reference a poem by Narasimhachari and how he in turn references Bandagi, who was a martyr in the Telangana movement, where he says, Chari writes, Bandagi, Bandagi, I really want to shake hands with you. I really want to warm our hands with lots of love amidst all these burnt gardens. For the good of this entire village, we need to dance with the martyrs. So this was written while discussing the armed struggle which took place between
Right.
1940s and 50s.
Yes.
But the armed struggle is a very Telangana sentiment. Right. How is Telugu Muslim writing different in Telangana and now in Andhra, Rayalaseema, or even coastal Andhra?
There are two questions connected here. One question is the very nature of that poem. One of the best things that happened because of the rise of Muslim writing in Telugu and also elsewhere is this retrieval of Muslim histories.
Okay.
So they were trying to recover those spaces where Muslims played a key role in the making of local histories, political histories, and also cultural histories. This poem by Narasimhachari actually retrieves that intense movement in the history of Telangana armed struggle. But unfortunately, due to high emphasis on economic determinism, according to leftist ideology, we never focused on other aspects of this movement, particularly the participation of Muslim fighters, even now remains understudied.
Okay.
This poem actually captures that movement. And the other question is about Rayalaseema, right? I actually published a book, The Festival of Peers, Popular Islam and Shared Devotion in South India in 2013 with Oxford University Press. That book actually is all about Rayalaseema Muslims.
Okay.
But it's more about non-Muslim participation in Muslim devotional events and then
So
practices.
Hindus, for instance,
So I actually wanted to connect those movements. So Rayalaseema actually represents As you know, Rayalaseema has huge Muslim population,
Yeah.
and then in every village you have this Muslim community, different like levels, layers of Muslim community. So that book actually portrays the life stories of Muslims in Rayalaseema and their interactions with Hindus. So that is one kind of history that we need to revisit.
Right. It's especially interesting that you say that because you also bring up how while during Muharram, Sita from the Hindu epic Ramayana and Fatima, the Prophet's daughter, both are invoked. How does that explain the syncretic relationship? Because there is clearly a syncretic relationship
Right,
between
right.
the two faiths, which are now
Right,
very clearly distinct because of the political climate we live in.
right.
How does that celebration explain how Telugu Muslim writing or writing about the Telugu landscape is different from, say, writing about the landscape in any other part of this country?
Good question. I need to think about this question a lot before I respond to that. One thing that I want to, because most of the time when we speak about Hindu-Muslim exchanges, we barely speak about gendered aspects. So, how do we understand women participation within this ritual system? So, when I documented this story, this is a long narrative, long oral narrative poem that runs through 12 to 15 pages. And then when I was documenting this story in Telangana, uh, most male performers discouraged me. Don't do this stuff. This is women's stuff. They don't know anything about Islamic history. They don't know anything about any history. They just sing whatever that comes to their mind, that comes to their heart. It's not worth even performing, even documenting. And then they discouraged me totally. No, they. But I was persistent, and then no, I want this story. This is very important for my theorization of Hindu-Muslim exchanges in South India.
Right.
So who is Sita and then who is Fatima? How these people are connecting these two wonderful characters from two different histories, two different localities, two different religious systems.
And there, it didn't flare up into any problem whatsoever.
Yes,
when we were
yes.
trying, yeah.
But of course, this is very, even documenting that long narrative poem was little difficult for me because that is totally exclusively women's space.
Yeah.
So it took me a lot of time for me to convince these performers, yeah, this is very important aspect of your performance. This should be documented. This is history. And then I actually, in many ways, I kind of forced them to
Yeah.
agree with the documentation. But I did. That was the first time it was documented. And then my next book actually is titled after this
Okay.
song, Sita is Fatima, Fatima is Sita. So it's about all these Hindu-Muslim exchanges in particularly Telangana, some parts of Rayalaseema, and then Andhra.
So in Telangana would be Karimnagar and
Karimnagar, this was documented in Karimnagar.
okay. All right. So it's interesting that you are speaking about women's spaces, and you had also mentioned before we started shooting about how, except for a few magazines like Kanjira, in the early to late 90s, even now popular Telugu newspapers like Eenadu, Andhra Jyoti, Andhra Prabha did not allow for Muslim writing, women writing, Dalit writing to flourish.
Right,
And because of that, alternative counterculture magazines came up.
right.
What was the issue, and how did these counterculture, what kind of voices did these counterculture magazines accommodate? But what was the issue first with which Eenadu or other news outlets had with publishing such writing?
Thank you for the question. This is a question about histories of media culture, histories of literary cultures.
Yeah.
So one thing is that we clearly have this tension between mainstream cultures and alternative cultures. Alternative cultures were never documented in any way in mainstream media, like big newspapers. They never cared for any of these identities or their writings. Even feminist writing to publish something related to feminism, that took a lot of time, effort, but in the process, these identitarian writers, poets, and activists, they started their own little magazines. I would make a distinction between big magazines and then little magazines.
Yeah.
Kanjira was one of that little magazine that published the immediate reflections on Babri Mosque demolition. So, in 1992 December, we had this Babri Mosque demolition, and Kanjira, just in 6 months, published bulletin, poetry bulletin, collecting all the poems related to Babri Mosque demolition, and then also like some translations. So they needed at that point, because big newspapers, big magazines, they were aiming at different goals. They wanted to promote humanism. They wanted to talk about more nationalism. They want to talk more about, encourage more about very general kind of literary writings. So they needed alternate space. Women writers, Dalits, Muslims, they all needed alternative spaces. Only then they started these little magazines. Kanjira was one of them. And then we have like little magazines from like Jamuku, Kavitvam,
So, can you think
like
of
Samantara.
what kind of issues were discussed, and can you name a few writers and what was the kind of writing that they were doing at that point of time for these magazines?
A lot of names.
Okay.
So, in the essay that I published with Oxford University Press, I actually mentioned most of the names. But rather than names, I want to emphasize the trends.
Okay.
So, one big trend was to dismantle Hindutva and then Hindu centric ideas. And then at the second layer, to question, to challenge mainstream politics, cultural politics. And then finally, to promote identity question and the engagements with local histories,
Yeah.
local caste groups, and then very minute identities were also taken seriously. So that is a big shift that happened. Maybe that happened in elsewhere, like Hindi literature, and then Marathi, of course,
Yeah.
in Tamil.
Yeah.
But as a Telugu scholar, I wanted to highlight
Yeah.
how Telugu enters into this debate, and then how do we understand the interventions made by poets and writers writing in Telugu after 1990s.
So, another thing which you bring up while you're documenting the rise of the Muslim boys is to speak about the Dudekula community,
Right.
which is a community of Muslims who are now categorized as BCB,
Right.
and they are cotton cleaners. What was their voice also something which emerged, especially after the mosque demolition, and what was their unique contribution to the entire movement of Telugu and Urdu syncretic writing?
Right now, I am working on the translations of Dudekula poetry into English.
Okay.
So,
So, what could you
but
tell us? Yeah.
it's not an immediate impact of Babri demolition. It took a while to Dudekulas to speak about their issues. So I think that's the next phase of Muslim writing.
So, what
So
were
when
their issues, for instance?
they want to talk about how they are different from mainstream Muslim cultures, and then how their language, their idiom, is specific. Like they don't speak Urdu.
Mm.
They don't know Arabic. They don't know Quran. They don't
Okay.
know anything about what we call Islamic or normative Muslim
Yeah.
dimension, right? So they have their own caste narrative.
Yeah.
So if you go to like villages in Telangana, Rayalaseema, coastal Andhra, and other places, you can clearly see that distinction. There is a culture. There is a cultural distinction. There is a religious distinction, and there is a distinction in lifestyle, everyday life. So they actually want to talk more about their very distinctive lifestyle.
Is it
Not
would caste be a good parallel? Would the Dalit writing be a good parallel to this, or would that?
yes, yes. It's actually I always consider this as equivalent to Dalit writing.
Okay.
So it's as powerful as Dalit writing. So we have several layers within Dudekula writing. We have short fiction writers, you have poets,
Yeah.
you have lyricists, and then you also have like the Dudekula writers who want to talk about political matters. These things are totally different from normative Muslim life or Muslim literary cultures. So we can clearly understand the difference between their expressions, and then
Okay.
the resolution, the resolution to their conflicts is totally different.
Okay. Okay. So, since we spoke about Sita's Fatima, Fatima's Sita, and how the oral culture and oral tradition, folklore spread and was witnessed especially during Muharram, I also want to touch upon Telugu Muslim female writers in Telugu.
Right.
So the two popular names which came up when I was reading up a little, speaking to people, was
Right.
Shah Jahana in Telangana and
Right.
Mehajabi in Andhra. So what unique contribution do these two writers throw up in terms of looking at this landscape? Because while there is a lot of female Muslim writing, I don't know necessarily how we would relocate them and look at them in the context of the Telugu states.
Right.
And is there generally a lack of representation that we're looking at, and how does that pan out? Yeah.
Yeah, this I consider like in the history of Muslim writing as a third phase. So in third phase, along with Dudekula writing, we also saw the emergence of Muslim women writing. Even now, we don't have many names, so you can count them on fingers. Like Shah Jahana and Mahijabin, and then in contemporary generation, after 2000, we have Nasreen Khan, Salima, and then I can give few more names, but I couldn't recollect them. But they are totally different from regular Muslim writings. So, of course, Shah Jahana also represents Dudekula dimension of Muslim life. So, her poetry portrays the life stories of Ladaf. Ladaf is Urdu for Dudekula.
Okay.
And then Mahijabin portrays regular Muslim life. And then she uses Muslim symbolism, images. And then these new writers, particularly coming after 2000, they are also trying to get more into political aspects. This is quite interesting phenomenon. So how one Muslim women writer understands regular politics. It might be regular politics or cultural politics or religious politics. How do they understand? And then what is their perception? And then what are their articulations? So this is quite interesting phenomenon. And then we still need a lot of study. Even though there are very few, their interventions made a big difference in terms of gendered narrative, women-related images, similar to the song we mentioned before, Sita
Yeah.
is Fatima. They are also unveiling that dimension of Hindu-Muslim aspect. So this is quite inviting kind of trend.
Is there a lack of research in general because into looking at Telugu literature and specifically um, looking at Muslim community in the Telugu states? Is there a lack of research?
In terms of, I'm sorry to say this, in general, literary criticism and then literary theoretical matters are not that developed in Telugu literary culture. There's still it's a big lack. When it comes to
And why do
identity
you think that
politics,
is? Why do
like
you think
women
that is?
writing, we have little amount of work related to women writing, but it's happening after so many decades of the beginnings of women writing, right? We have some really good work related to Dalit writing and Dalit literary criticism, but in terms of Muslim writing, that is still a big lack. And then, of course, there are a lot of challenges here. And then we need to connect these local Muslim writings with global Muslim writing.
Yeah.
Then only we can understand the interventions these people are making. So we need to have that historical perspective.
Yeah.
And then we also need to have a lot of theoretical support to understand where exactly we are, what is our point of departure,
Okay.
where are we heading. So it takes a lot of time and effort.
All right. So it's because you spoke about connecting it with uh, literature from other countries and globalizing it, so to speak. I have to ask, just within the borders of the Telugu state, has have Telangana and Andhra, writers in Telangana and Andhra, especially Muslim writers here, borrowed heavily from the border states, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Orissa, for example. Have they been influenced by writing there? Is that something which has happened? And how has it been enforced?
Unfortunately, we lost that connection.
Okay.
We used to have wonderful cultural and literary connections with Tamil,
Okay.
because in Tamil you have wonderful Muslim writing and there are a lot of resources there. And then in Karnataka, of course, because of the communal setting there, we have wonderful Muslim and Dalit writing. In Malayalam, it's amazing how Muslim writers, particularly fiction writers, like making some adventurous efforts. Uh, Somehow we are a little behind in Telugu. The reason, big reason, is that we just started. I always see this as the first step. This is a long journey. So 1992 Babri demolition. Of course, I see a lot of phases after that movement, but still we need more time, more effort. We actually, rather than poetry, I believe that we should migrate to prose, more Islamic studies, because a lot of things happening in terms of Islamic studies in global cultures. Because I also teach courses on Muslim writing at University of Pennsylvania. I always get wonderful students from other Muslim countries and then also from US. So they kind of, they always ask me like, you are always using these wonderful materials from elsewhere. What about Telugu materials?
Yeah.
And then I made it a point to translate few poems, few short stories into English. So we need to translate. We need this more. We need more translations from Telugu to English. Then only we can have more literary criticism or theory.
Before we wrap up, there is one thing I'd like to ask you to do. Um, in April 1993, you published a poem in Kanjira, and it was in response to the Babri Masjid's demolition. And if you'd like to, would you please read it out for us? The poem is titled Nirvi Ramapadam. So please read it out for us and then explain to us where it's coming from. The poem was written in Telugu, and Professor Mohammed is reading out the English translation of it.
Oh yes, I would love to read the poem anytime. So because that is my first love. So unfortunately, I don't have Telugu version here. This was it's a long poem, but I am going to read only segment. That also tells something about Muslim writing.
Yeah.
There is no meaning for my poetic line. There is no restraint except rays. Now I can tell what is death. Now I can supply definitions to restlessness, war, distress, death, and everything. For I am each one of them. I am the one who does not have admission anywhere. I don't have a country. I bow my head to the altar of anybody. All the while I have been carrying the sandals, Rama's sandals. But now I don't need countries and admissions. I only need anger and hatred, my wrath, my passion, my views, my feelings, all are prohibited. Now, how should I tell what is death? There is no death to my poetic line, it has only life. Death is the frontier between the bodies that fall. Death is there where life is sapped. Death is there where war ends. Death to earth is that when sky ceases. My poetry is the war. My poetry is the war that born out of death's womb. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So, would you please explain to us why you wrote this poem and where it's coming from?
This was an immediate reflection to Babri Mosque demolition. This was actually written around the same month, I think. December 6th, Babri Mosque demolition was happened. And then I think I wrote it like in just 2 weeks. But it took a while to get it published.
Yeah.
It was always there in my diaries. So, but I was trying to portray the mindscape of one young Muslim who was witnessing this demolition. So this is nothing to do with, I am not theorizing here. I'm not trying to like stop and think or and then say something and then connect it to humanism or something else. But I just want to, it's an outburst.
Right.
It's an emotion. It's not a recollection, right? So, but I also want to make it clear that nothing can stop me.
All right. And on that note, we'll conclude the interview. Thank you so much for joining us. And
Thank you, Anjana.
that was all for this interview. Please don't forget to subscribe to the News Minute, and thank you for watching us.